We are the third week in a series on understanding our families. And a number of you have asked, where can I learn more about this? And I have found the very best book for this to be written by Dr. Roberta Gilbert, who is, or at least she was, a local therapist. She recently retired and moved to Winchester, Virginia, where she's working with Shenandoah University. But she has written this, it's about a 22-chapter primer on understanding our families, titled Extraordinary Relationships. If you want the title and more information, I'm going to have this after the service. But if you go to Amazon, it's easy to find. Very popular book, Extraordinary Relationships, Dr. Roberta Gilbert. Well, tonight, in the scripture that Shannon read, I don't know if you heard it or not, but there was a lot of talk about Jesus. John the Baptist is speaking with his disciples, and he says, when Jesus comes by, "Here is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." A little bit later, he says, "I saw the Spirit descending from heaven like a dove, and it remained on him." Words about Jesus. I would imagine John was not the only one speaking about Jesus because of the radical nature of his teaching and his ministry. I would imagine lots of people were talking about him, but two of John the Baptist's disciples decided they wanted to know more, and so they followed Jesus for a while, and he turned around and he asked them, "What are you looking for?" And they said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" In other words, where do you teach? Where can we learn more about what you are talking about? And he said to them, "Come and see." They came, they saw, and they stayed and remained with him all the day and probably longer. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, don't just believe what you hear about me. Come and follow me. Spend time with me. Learn who I am from me, not just what others are saying. I would suspect these same two disciples were following Jesus in the next chapter of John's Gospel, where there is a wedding. And after the wedding, at the reception, for whatever reason, the wine runs out. And Mary, the mother of Jesus, comes to her oldest son and says, "Jesus, would you run down to the Westover market and pick up a few bottles of red and white wine?" And Jesus says, "Woman, what concern is that to you or me? My hour has not yet come." Now, I can't speak for Mary's expectations of her children, but if I talked like that to my mother, even as a young adult, she would have sent me to my room, or at worst, washed my mouth out with soap. I get the suspicion there is something simmering just below the surface in this family. I imagine that something is about to blow, that Mary maybe is at the end of her rope. Her oldest child who was not going into the usual professions. This son who was saying all these things and getting people upset. She probably just throws up her hands at this point and says, "Whatever, I can't live with this anymore." There was a musical play titled The Cotton Patch Gospel. Some of you may know it. The music was written by Harry Chapin. And there's a line in one of those songs that reads, "It ain't easy growing up to be Jesus." And I suspect it probably ain't easy growing up with Jesus in the house either. I mean, the guy's a kid and he's turning water into wine. I mean, I'm sure everybody was his best friend until they turned 21. But Jesus is also doing a very subtle thing here when he responds this way to his mother. He is very clearly telling his mother who he believes he is. He's defining himself. He is setting a boundary around himself, saying, this is who I am. This is what I will do. This is what I will not do. He's defining himself, which I believe all of us need to do in our lives. We must define ourselves. That's what adolescents do when they're kind of drifting away from their parents and their peers have more of an influence upon them. They're defining themselves. When everything goes well in our families, we don't really give our relationships a second thought. But when there's stress, when there's anxiety, when there's miscommunication, when there's a misunderstanding, when there's an argument, then we become very much attuned to what's going on in our families. And a number of things can happen. Last week, I talked about triangles. And I know that you have probably been looking for triangles everywhere this week. And I'm not going to talk about squares and circles tonight. Triangles was helpful last week. That's one way anxiety tends to move. If two parents have an argument, it's going to impact their child or their children. If two people in the office have a misunderstanding, it's going to affect other people in the office as well. Anxiety tends to run in triangles. But there are a couple more things that happen in our families or any kind of an emotional system, with colleagues at work, with people on your dorm hall, with friends in your neighborhood, with friends you go out with. There are a few other things that tend to happen when there are problems or anxieties as well. And I want to talk about those tonight. Let's say that two parents have a disagreement, a difference of opinion. I'm not going to even suggest something, but you think of something that maybe you and your spouse or a friend or a colleague have had a difference of opinion about. And these two people feel the anxiety as a stress upon their marriage, upon their relationship. Without even consciously being aware of it, they may triangle in one of their children or one of their siblings or one of their parents. And then that child begins to display symptoms like maybe headaches or nightmares or sleepwalking or what have you. If neither the mother nor the father gives in, then that stress kind of builds. And it builds to the point where now there is conflict in the relationship. There might be bitterness. There might be anger. There might be resentment. There might be disappointment. There's a lot of emotional energy that's going into these two people right now. And nothing seems to be coming out that's good. It's just the emotional energy is there because the anxiety is not resolved. And this is when in a relationship you hear the you word a lot. And if you're not careful, we point fingers. Like, you don't talk to me about things anymore. And you're not spending time with me. You're always clicking the TV changer. You're always watching football. You're always watching figure skating. You're not telling me how you're spending money, where you're spending money, when you're spending money. And it's not until I get the credit card bill at the end of the month and I'm responsible for paying it. You. If you would just, everything would be better. Fill in the blank. I see some heads nodding. You statements are clear indicators something's going on just below the surface and it's bubbling up. It's about to boil over. You wonder, why don't these two people just back down? But they don't, because there's so much emotion in this relationship. It's got to go somewhere. It's just boiling up, and irrational behaviors can begin to rise up, which is never a good thing. And then after you live with this kind of conflict for a while, the couple will often say, okay, let's just back off. I'm not going to back down. I'm not giving in. Let's just kind of agree to disagree and not resolve this right now. Let's kind of just back off. And so they back off. They don't talk about it. And a few days later they say, this feels pretty good. I don't feel the stress I did. But the problem's still there. It hasn't been resolved. They've merely traded one reaction for another. They used to feel conflict. Now what they're doing is they're distancing themselves from each other. It's an emotional kind of distance. It's not confronting the real issue that is there between the two of them. And you can see this. They might talk about superficial stuff and not the really important stuff. And this can go on for days, weeks, months. Sometimes it can go on for years. This not really communicating with one another. And then we kind of fall into that pattern. We kind of figure this is what the relationship's going to be like for the rest of my life. And then there's a sense of feeling unfulfilled about life. It's pretty easy if you're a visitor in somebody's home where there is this cutting off of communication. You can't just put your finger on it, but you kind of feel like something's not quite right here. It's the same in congregations. When congregations have a problem or something they're dealing with that's really causing some conflict in that congregation, and if a visitor comes on Sunday mornings, I hear them sometimes say, something just doesn't feel right in that place. I can't put my finger on it. I mean, people were polite, they were nice, but something wasn't right. It's almost like they didn't like each other very much. When this happens, the couple thinks everything is okay. But it's really not. All they do is think about the conflict. All they do is think about the distance between them. All they think about, they're putting all of their emotional energy in this thing. This kind of separation is what ultimately can lead to separation, like legal separation, and ultimately divorce. At work, when there is this kind of separation, it breaks down communication to the point where you can't even really provide the services to your clients or your customers in a really strong way, because so much of your energy is focused on your work team, on the stuff inside the office, that you don't really care so much about the clients or the customers. That's what it means when you go into a setting and you say, man, the tension in here is so thick, you can cut it with a knife. As a last resort, after conflict, after living with distance for so long, there is the point where you decide, I'm just going to get away from this. I'm just going to cut myself off. I can't deal with this. It's not working. I quit. I'm getting away from this. And I know that you've seen this. You see this when you talk to somebody who doesn't really talk to his or her parents anymore. You see cutoff in an adolescent who was trying to figure out whom he or she is. And the parents want that child to be one thing, and the child is kind of rebelling. And the parents keep trying harder and becoming more restrictive and willing that child to fit the mold they want the child to be. And sometimes that child will even run away from home because he or she just needs time and space to kind of figure out who she is or who he is. That's cutoff. You see cutoff when I counsel couples getting married. One of the things I have people do is we create a family tree. Who are your siblings? Who are your parents, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents? And so often, one of the people in the couple has aunts and uncles on their, brothers and sisters to their mother and father who they don't even know. and know absolutely nothing about that chain of the family. Something happened in the past, and the brother and the sister, or the brother and the brother, have not resolved it. And they just cut off, and subsequently the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren are the ones who really suffer when that happens. There has to be a better way in our relationships, and I believe there is a better way. There are two things that are so important, that conflict and distance and this cutoff are symptomatic of two very basic needs that we have. And one of those needs is to know who we are. It's to have an identity. It's to define ourselves. And when we define ourselves, we are saying, this is who I am, and this is who I am not. It's a way of saying that I am Ed and Shannon is Shannon. And she is who she is, and I am who I am. It distinguishes between us. It differentiates. It's a division of sorts. It's important for kids to be able to define themselves, because when a child's growing up, the child doesn't know who he or she is apart from the parents. And as that child matures and grows, we want them to have a sense of self. Not too much of a sense of self, at least until they're 18. Then we give them more freedom. Well, freedom really comes when you get your driver's license, doesn't it? So we'll figure that one out later. We need to define who we are. The second need we have is that even though we define ourselves, we're still connected. We're connected with one another. I am Ed. I know who Ed is, and Ed is not Jeff. Ed is not Helen. Ed is Ed. Helen is Helen, and Jeff is Jeff. But still, we are connected. I'm the pastor of this church. I have a responsibility to you. Jeff is a pastor of this church. He has a responsibility to you. Helen is a member of this church. She has a responsibility to this congregation as well. We know who we are, but we're also connected with one another. Those are two things that are always sort of held in tension, but they both need to be there. But when they're not, when one of them is stronger than the other and things get out of balance, that's often when problems begin to arise. For example, as the pastor of the church, if I don't know who I am, if I don't have a sense of myself, I could somehow begin to believe all I am is the pastor of Mount Olivet Church. And I have no value as a person unless I am serving in the role as a pastor. And so I might work 24/7 all the time, because I get a sense of who I am only when I'm working as a pastor. I don't have a relationship with my family or my kids or my spouse. All I'm here for is for you. Now that's not good, is it? Because my sense of self is wrapped up in you as a congregation. And ultimately, at some point, I'm going to find out I'm pretty empty. And so I need to know who I am as a pastor. At the same time, I need to remain connected to you. I can't become so much an individual that I somehow distance myself from you, and you might think, golly, he's not approachable at all. He doesn't care about us. It needs to be a balance between the two. It begins by defining who we are, figuring out who we are. I have a great story about that. I have a nephew. It's not Logan, my nephew. His ears just popped up. Logan, my nephew, works up there at the soundboard. Everybody wave to Logan. Hey, Logan. Logan never socializes. He comes and he works and he goes home. So let's make a point of thanking Logan tonight. Well, anyway, I have a nephew, not Logan, and he wants to know what I'm going to talk about because he knows all his nephews. I have a nephew. Let me back up. 2 years ago, my son Harley graduated from Virginia Tech. And for graduation weekend, since we had so many people coming, it was about 16 of us, we rented a house at Crater Lake State Park. And my parents were there, Harley's other grandparents, Sharon's parents were there, the siblings were there, the whole family was there that could make it. One of the nephews, also at Virginia Tech, not Logan, he knows who I'm talking about now. One of the other nephews who lives in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech was invited, said he would come. His parents were there. His brother was there. His now sister-in-law was there. His grandparents were there. Everybody was there, but he wasn't there. We had dinner the night before. He didn't come. The day of the graduation, we get there early so that we can reserve our spot. You know, Tech, it's a big school. You got to reserve your row. And we reserved a seat for this nephew and for my mother. My mother refused to go in. She insisted on waiting for the other nephew out front, Burris Hall. If you know that, you know that. We wait. We wait. He doesn't show. You know where this is going. Finally, the graduation's about to begin. My mother's not coming in. I get up. I go out. And she's looking everywhere. Where is he? Where is he? She's trying to call him. She's texting him. She's finally figured out how to text. And all this stuff. And he's not showing up. I said, Mom, let me explain something here. I think he's trying to figure out who he is. And he's kind of confused about that right now. And it'll be okay. Let's just give him a little space. Just let it go and come on in to the party. She didn't like it. But she agreed, and she came on in. What he was doing in not coming, he's trying to figure out who he is, where he begins and where he ends, what family expectations are expected of him, and if and how he should act on them. I don't think he handled it very well. He said he was going to come, but he didn't. But I understand what's going on. What I said, when you face something like this, I think is so crucial. And it's kind of like what I did with my mother. And that is, stop and think. Don't speak right away. Don't let your emotions be the first words that come out of your mouth. Because when we let our emotions be the first words out of our mouth, we usually feel good for about 5 seconds. And then we feel bad. And the person we talk to feels bad for the next 20 years. Don't let your emotions be the first words out of your mouth. But stop and think rationally, not irrationally, which is what often happens when emotions rule the day. After all, it takes two people to fight. And if you back down and say, I'm not going to fight about this, I'm going to reason about this, it usually makes a big difference. Back to the story. He never showed. We went home. We had a big dinner that night. He did finally show up. I had to hold my mother back from him, but she was ultimately okay. You need to define yourself, where you begin and end, what you will do, what you won't do. I find I have to do this sometimes. You know, when somebody asks me, what's your position on this? And I realize, in a sense, I'm speaking in different roles. I'm speaking as Ed Walker. I have my personal beliefs. And I'm speaking as the pastor of Mount Olivet Church. I'm speaking as a United Methodist minister. Now, I may be wrong, and I can certainly, I'm not unchangeable. I may change my mind, but at least this is how I see it. When I respond that way, I'm defining myself. I'm not telling you what you need to believe. I'm not saying you need to believe what I need to believe. I'm simply saying this is who I am. And this is how I see it. And I might change my mind, and I may not. Define yourself. That's the first thing we need to do. And the other is we need to remain connected with each other. We can't run away. We can't back off. We have to stay in this together. We need to define ourselves, but we also need to hold together. That's how healthy families operate. By letting people be who they are, within reason, within the law, within morality, but also stay connected, love each other, even in our differences. There's a great biblical story that illustrates this so well. It's the story of Isaac and Rebekah in the book of Genesis. They have twin boys. Esau is the oldest by a few minutes. Esau he's the hunter in the family. You know, he's got a long beard, probably looks like that guy in Duck Dynasty. Has a long beard, and he's hairy, and he goes out into the sticks and the scrub, and he goes duck hunting and deer hunting, probably reads Field and Stream and things like that. And then his little brother, by a few minutes, is Jacob. And Jacob is more of a homebody. Jacob probably watches Food Network on television. He likes to play around in the kitchen. He likes to experiment with different dishes and spices and herbs. Probably has an herb garden outside the kitchen door. Now the story sets them up from the very beginning. When it says, Isaac the father loved Esau, and Rebekah the mother loved Jacob. What a setup. You know you're going to have problems when dad loves one son and mom loves the other son more. And these two kids are going to be at each other's throats for the rest of their lives. One day Esau comes in from hunting. He's tired, he's thirsty, he's hungry, and Jacob's there in the kitchen experimenting with all these different kinds of lentils, and it smells simply scrumptious. And so Esau says, Jacob, please, I'm famished, give me something to eat. And Jacob says, sure, I'll be glad to give you something to eat, but I want to try your birthright for a while. Excuse me? I want your birthright. The birthright is a privilege reserved for the oldest son in a Hebrew family. It's the majority share of the family inheritance, and it usually goes to the oldest son. Well, Esau was older by a few minutes. He becomes the one to receive the blessing, the inheritance. He has, by birth, that right. And Jacob, he wants to try it out for a while. Well, Esau, he's hungry. And second of all, he has no idea what the value of that birthright really is. And so he says, sure, why not? I'll give it to you. Try it out for a while. And he takes it, and then he takes the stew and thinks it's wonderful and everything is great. A little later, their father is on his deathbed. And by this time, Isaac has lost his eyesight. He's very elderly, and the only way he can tell his two sons apart is by feel. And he knows that Esau has a long beard, and he's hairy, and he's got calloused hands because he's an outdoorsman. And he knows that Jacob has smooth skin and has no facial hair, and he has very smooth hands. And so he calls for Esau so he can convey or confer. Which one is it? Mac will let me know, I'm sure. Anyway, it's time to give the family blessing to the oldest son, Esau. Well, Rebekah hears about this. Rebekah's the mom. And she somehow shoos Esau out the door, probably said, look, there's a deer, go. And he goes off and he's hunting the deer. And she says, Jacob, come here quickly. And she gets some furry mittens and some furry clothes and puts them on him. And she puts some fur on his face and sends him into the room with Esau and just says, say you're your brother Esau. Just say you're Esau. Go on in there. And he goes in. And he fools Isaac that he is in fact Esau, but he's not. Isaac gives Jacob, unawares, the family blessing. And once you give it, you can't take it back. Esau comes home. He hears what has happened. He's livid. He's furious. I imagine Rebekah had to go lock and hide the key to the gun rack because he was probably going to kill his brother. And poor Jacob, the guy's a jerk. Jacob runs for his life out of the house and just grabs what he can as quickly as he can. And his mother packs a bag and shoos him away, saying, get out of here before he kills you. Go, go. And Jacob runs and he leaves town and he leaves the country and he ends up far, far away from home, but in the very land of his father. That's distance. That's cut off. See the anxiety in that family? Two parents loving other children more, and now the children are at war with each other, and the anxiety is getting, and the conflict is getting higher and higher and stronger, and they're tricking each other, and there are secrets in the family, and there's darkness in the family, and finally Jacob just runs away for his life. That's cut off. And Jacob stays gone from the family for generations. Generations. That's cut off. I imagine when Esau got married and they did his family tree, he didn't even talk about his brother. He didn't have a brother anymore. His brother was dead as far as he was concerned. At some point, Jacob decides he's got to go home. There's a part to his past he's got to figure out and resolve before he dies. He's probably been in therapy now for many, many months, and his therapist said, you've got to go talk to your brother. And so Jacob gets his wives and his children and his grandchildren all together, and they start making the pilgrimage to their parents' home to meet Esau. And the night before they are to meet, Jacob goes to bed, and he has a dream. And in the dream, there is this angel that he begins to fight. And they fight all night long. And ultimately, Jacob triumphs in the fight. But the angel strikes him in the hip, dislocating his hip. Jacob is going to carry that injury for the rest of his life, to remind him of who he is and what he has done and what he has been through, and that all of the anxiety and all the turmoil that he has brought on his family does not go away automatically or mysteriously. It's going to affect him for the rest of his life. But he gets up in the morning and he crosses the river Jabbok and he walks to his brother Esau. He doesn't know what Esau is going to do. He doesn't know if he's going to pull a knife. He doesn't know if he's going to yell at him or hit him. But he walks up to his brother Esau and he says, Esau, forgive me. I was wrong. Forgive me. And Esau forgives his brother. They don't forget. I'm sure they don't forget. But they forgive, and they start that first step toward reconciliation and peace and resolution in their family. That was a beautiful day. And I would imagine the party of coming together, all these family, cousins getting to know each other for the first time, first cousins and second cousins, and telling stories about the family and showing photographs off their iPhones and all these things. It was a joyful day. That is a beautiful thing when our families can come back together, when the distance and the cutoff are worked through. Like our relationship with God in a way. God creates us. God redeems us. God loves us. And even when we are rebellious, when we run away from God, God's still there. God doesn't forget us. God is like the father of the prodigal son who can't sleep at night because even though one son is there, the other son isn't home, and he longs for him to come home. That's what God is like, longing for us to come home. That's what the Lord's Supper reminds us of the lengths to which God will go to bring us back. That God will even sacrifice God's Son. That God will even shed the blood of God's most beloved Son so that we might come close once again.